This is the Tank Museum's Light Mark IV tank, a British light tank of the mid-1930s. It went into service in about 1935. As you can see, it looks a bit sorry for itself at the moment. It had a restoration project started on it a couple of decades ago, but that didn't get very far. So it's about to head off to a private conservator in Kent who's going to start work on it to bring it back to a much better order for the museum. And we're going to follow how it progresses. And here we are now, several months later, in Kent at Armoured Engineering, where the Light Mark IV is being restored, and you can see the changes already. Now, the Light Mark IV was a British tank of the 1930s. Only about 38 were made. The Mark I, II and III were really experimental versions, and the Army was getting used to the idea of how light tanks might be employed, what was the best model to make. And when the Light Mark IV came along, it's actually the last light tank with only a two-man crew. You've got a driver and a commander in the top. It had a Meadows engine, quite nippy, about 36 miles an hour on the open road when it got going, but it was still really an interim model. Only about 38 of them, we think, were made, and they were mainly used for training. Some of them, though, in 1940, we know, ended up in France because a number were captured by the Germans and converted into other uses, like an assault gun. So this particular vehicle, it's a real rare survivor for us to have a bit of British armour from that period, and it's a real privilege as well to try and get it back into a running order so people can see it moving, if all goes well, of course. So let's have a look at one or two of the hurdles that the restorers have had to go through. I'm here with Gavin from Armoured Engineering, and we're going to have a look at this fantastic Meadows engine and some of the problems, which I gather pistons were one of them that you had with this engine.
Yeah, pistons were a massive issue actually. We removed the original pistons and I was trying to source some new rings because the piston rings we took off, they all crumbled away and fell off, and we had to replace them. And on some advice, I was told to not even bother chasing original rings. They're too difficult to find, too expensive, not to bother. And instead, I was told to buy Volvo Amazon pistons.
The car, the family car, the 60s car. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a piston out of that car. Mainly because they're cheaper and easier to find, and you can get rings for them, you know, looking into the future. But we did encounter two problems. One problem was the hole for the gudgeon pin. This is actually a 22mm, and the original Meadows piston is a 23.8mm gudgeon pin.
So not quite,
away,
yeah.
There's a problem, we would need to bore this out. So before we did that, we thought we'd better check all the other dimensions. So obviously the bore size is exactly the same. That would be absolutely fine. When you offer the pistons up next to each other, the measurement from the centre of the gudgeon pin to the top of the piston is actually slightly different. So if you can imagine it, you put the pistons in, the newer piston will actually sit slightly higher than the original piston. So, all right, it's okay, we can machine the top off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. But after you'd machine the top off, the actual thickness of the crown would be thinner than the original piston.
And it won't stand up to it,
so it wouldn't stand up to the combustion and the heat and the forces that are going on there. So we have had to rule that out. So unfortunately, this piston is now back on the shelf, and we've gone back with the original piston, and I've actually managed to source original rings for a fraction of the price of these Volvo pistons, believe it or not, and they even came in their original Meadows packaging. So we fitted those straight on, we've gapped them, the pistons have had a nice good clean, and they're ready to go back in.
Brilliant, and it's going in that Meadows engine, which I was hearing earlier, that was actually being used by Lagonda racing cars at the same sort of time.
It was, yeah. So in 1935, when this engine was made, Lagonda put the same engine in their car, okay, with some modifications. They put a supercharger on it, a different camshaft, bigger carburetors, and they raced it in a Le Mans 24-hour, and they actually won in 1935.
And you see, for us, of course, we always think of a racing car engine. We think of things like the Scorpion with the famous Jaguar E-type engine put in, but they were doing that with an armoured car, well, a light tank way back in the 1930s, still trying to find a power source from something that had enough oomph, and they're going to Meadows, but the same engine that Meadows are making for a sports car seems to be an amazing sort of coincidence over time. So these issues that come back time and time again. So this is a gearbox. Any major issues with this?
No, the gearbox was a pretty successful mission. We fully stripped it down, we've inspected every single bearing. Obviously we've painted inside.
Why do you do that? Is that just to protect it, or?
Yeah, because this again is made from magnesium.
Right.
So the paint is like a protective layer between the contaminants in the oil and obviously the magnesium.
And that'll just eat away otherwise at the actual body of the...
This had actually rotted away a small hole on the bottom, which we've had welded up, but that was a minor issue. The only real big thing we've done is replace the steering clutch friction linings, as these were asbestos. Obviously back in 35 these asbestos, so we've now put a modern equivalent on.
And it's just, it looks pretty much ready to go back in.
Yeah, she's going to get a lick of paint, and that's pretty much it. Seal her up and she'll go ready to go on the engine.
Brilliant. One thing we always emphasise is we can't do any of this work. We can't make these films without public support. And because of that, we've launched some new ways that you watching this can help support us at the Tank Museum. You can join our patron scheme. You can buy things from the shop. You can just perhaps give us a donation. This amazing project is being done just because of one person's generosity. Now, most of us can't possibly afford to restore the whole of a vehicle, but we can do something. So please remember, we are an independent charity. We're not centrally funded. So if there is a way you can support us, please do.